Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, today we're continuing our Evil Elite series with a special edition covering Charlie Kirk's assassination, with so many theories floating around, anomalies, coincidences. We're going to dive into all of this, and it really ties together so much of what I've been talking about in this series, talking about who really runs the world as the Great Awakening and the Great Noticing continues. So this was a good tweet by Jackson Hinkle here, who's put together all these connections to Israel so far, and there's still more information coming out, which is why it's best to give these things a few days for the dust to settle, because we really don't have a clear picture. So yeah, I'll let you pause and have a read through all these anomalies yourself at your own pace. But let's dive into what I think is the most important and the things that don't really add up about all this. So I didn't follow Charlie Kirk that closely. Like a lot of you, I've probably seen some of his clips floating around. But he was a huge supporter of Israel in previous years and had started to change his tune, I guess, more recently, which is a dangerous game to play, as he was funded by a lot of, Israelis, Zionists, Jewish funders and that type of thing. And he had a huge audience, particularly with the youth of America. And Israel are really losing the PR battle with everything that's going on in Gaza. And now they're bombing, 7 different countries, and people looking into these other historical events that they've been involved with and so on. So there's so many of these clips that have been doing the rounds where Charlie Kirk was starting to question things like October 7th, which really kicked off the latest stage of this entire war in Gaza. And as I've spoken about and covered, we've actually had IDF soldiers come out and talk about how there was this stand down order and allowing this to happen to give them the excuse to perpetually go on, with this war, where even Charlie was talking about this being an ethnic cleansing genocide. And YouTube have now started to take down some of these clips. And these are things that are going to really piss off some powerful people, with someone with a voice as big as Charlie starting to notice and say these types of things. And he expressed that he was worried that Israel were going to kill him for, turning against them. He openly spoke about these large billionaires that have been funding these open border policies. I've been talking about these NGOs and people like George Soros who are funding this flooding of migrants from certain regions, many of which have been constantly bombed for generations now, into these white European countries to cause division and chaos and hatred. I'm going to talk about where this is all heading at the end as well. But Charlie had started to talk about these things. And not only that, the ties to Epstein, Mossad, Ghislaine Maxwell, these intelligence agencies creating these blackmail honeypot rings and either bribing or blackmailing politicians and people in positions of power, which is what I've been talking about at length in this series. So let's not forget, on the very day that all this happened, the Epstein files were once again blocked from being released. And as I've said so many times, this is really the key, getting this list and all this information out into the public arena to wake people up to the extent of this corruption, these blackmail rings, the child trafficking, all the pedo stuff. It all connects back to this Epstein list, which we need to get and need to wake everyone up to before we can, start to defeat the real enemy amongst all this. So as Dan Blazarian sort of sums up here, it really looks like Charlie Kirk was starting to figure it out, starting to rub people up the wrong way, a really big voice, and they wanted him silenced. So there's a lot of theories floating around about the actual shooting itself, and I'm not going to show anything here that, the graphic stuff, but there was people in the background doing different military hand signals and whatever. Again, we don't know what this means just yet. People talking about this black spot, maybe it was just a lapel mic that moved on his shirt in different frame by frame breakdowns, theories of if he had on a bulletproof vest or if it was something else. We just don't know yet. So we have to be open to all these possibilities. But all we do know is that this official story of how the shooting took place and who it was and all that just doesn't add up at all. So we've got these clips with someone on the roof, running away. the exact moment that this happened, but at the same time, this was a great breakdown here by Michael Savage, talking about how what the FBI said at the press conference makes no sense. The fact that he's left this rifle in the bushes, but then when you can see him jumping off the roof, he doesn't have a rifle on him, and talking about how it just would take too much time to break that rifle down, then why reassemble it in the woods? All these things that just make no sense whatsoever to the official story. So at the moment, Tyler Robinson is in custody, and he hasn't admitted this yet, but they're talking about him maybe being placed on suicide watch, and his dad was saying that he did it. We've had the FBI talk about admissions in Discord, but then Discord came out with a statement saying that they didn't have any evidence of that. So just all these conflicting stories that are coming out at the moment, that hopefully we get to the truth. Not only that, the fact that this can happen on a college campus that should have, all these surveillance cameras with good quality footage, is that in the hands of the FBI? And are we going to get more? But, a lot of the grainy footage and phone footage and all that type of thing being low quality, we should have bulletproof evidence on what really happened with high definition footage on these college campuses that already have all this security. So once this took place, we had this man, George Zinn, come forward and say that he did the shooting, and this was obviously a distraction because it wasn't him. Now, the crazy thing is that he's got ties to 9/11. He was also involved, I believe, in calling in a false bomb attack in 2013 as well. So, as Ryan Matter pointed out here, the chances of this guy being involved in 2 or even 3 of these things, it's a 1 in 2 billion chance. So these things just aren't coincidences. This guy was just happened to be there and put his hand up. Now, was all this the distraction so that the real shooter, if it was, say, a professional marksman and an inside job, that type of thing, was it so that they could get away in this private jet that disabled its location tracking, that's only 12 minutes from Utah Valley University? It's owned by another wealthy donor. Same old thing. All these ties that just don't add up, that we need to be getting a real investigation into. So not only that, it was interesting that Trump tweeted this photo with this saying down the bottom. And again, this is such a strange thing to say. And as this person points out here, he thought it was a reference to this story of a Jew who pretended to be a Gentile over in Germany back in the day, but it's actually a slang term for a gullible patsy. So why on earth would you be tweeting something like this in this term? It's very, very strange. If you look at the bird's eye view of the Utah campus where it was shot, again, this symbolism that we know that these insiders love to use, just not a coincidence, and very, very strange, using a menorah here where Charlie sits right on this 5th candle where this took place. Charlie's last YouTube short that he uploaded was titled "Enough is Enough," which is another tidbit here, the Illuminati card game with Trump being shot. So again, very, very strange things that all tie together to make this more mysterious. Now, not only that, both Trump and Netanyahu tweeted within 4 minutes at the exact same time of him being shot. And so this is, do you even have time to type this out? They're in completely different time zones, Trump and Netanyahu, and they happen to tweet exactly 4 minutes after this all happens. Very, very strange. Not only that, the Jerusalem Post in Israel was the first news outlet to break this hours ahead of anyone else, even the US media outlets. So very, very strange. We've got Netanyahu coming out and blaming, Muslims and talking about radical Muslims, and this is the problem as well, before we really knew who was to blame. So, this is just like operations in the past that I've spoken about in those previous Evil Elite series videos, where they're very quick to blame who they want that anger and hatred pointed towards. Ben Shapiro, who's obviously very pro-Israel Zionist, he came out the next day and spoke about how he's going to take over Charlie's Turning Point USA tour. And again, this is a pretty weird thing to do and say so quickly, and when I touched on the PR war and getting around the American youth to try and convince them to stay on Israel's side with all of this. Again, pretty strange thing for Ben Shapiro to do. And you've probably seen those clips where Charlie was debating Ben and pushing back on a lot of this stuff, which was making Ben, pretty uncomfortable, someone that's been fully supportive of everything going on. We also had the famous Rabbi Shmuley, who never seems to be too far away from any of these instances and high power politicians, announced a fundraiser for himself, and how these people kind of twist it and make it about themselves and make themselves the victims. It just doesn't sit right with a lot of people, and fair enough. Now, the other thing that's come out in the last few days is that with Charlie starting to notice and change his tune towards Israel and Zionism, this type of thing, he was invited to go to Israel, and he refused or turned down this order. And Netanyahu's reading this letter about how Charlie was such an avid supporter, and some people saying that letter's fake and whatnot. But this ties in with other things that Candace has been talking about here, where they're offering huge money. They're already funding him, tens of millions of dollars, but offering even more to launch, an anti-Tucker campaign, as Tucker's been really starting to call this stuff out. Now, Candace did a special this morning, which has already got over 3 million views in 7 hours, talking about the pressure that he was under, the phone calls from Netanyahu, the ties to these other Jewish Zionist billionaires like Bill Ackman, and how they actually had this intervention a couple of weeks ago. And this was all the pressure that Charlie felt he was under. Grey Zone put out a piece on this if you want to read more, but it's very, very clear the picture that is being built here, where they were trying to bring him back on side and offer him more money, trying to tell him not to have voices on that were anti-Israel and that type of thing. So Charlie was talking about this and tweeting about this, as I covered just before as well. So Bill Ackman confirmed that he did host this meeting with Charlie. Candace has invited him to come on the show, and we'll see what more comes of all this, with this money being thrown around to try and silence him. So Max Blumenthal did this good interview here with Tim Dillon, where they're talking about not only Charlie fearing, but Donald Trump fearing for his life, and talking about the blackmail that he's under and the pressure, and talking about how the Secret Service actually discovered these electronic devices on some of their vehicles placed by Israeli agents. Now, you remember the Israeli pager attack and how sophisticated they are with their, electronic devices, as well as just all their intelligence gathering. So this is stuff that's really coming out, and hopefully if you follow this series, none of this is really new to you, but this is going to awaken so much of the public as they dig into this story, and more continues to come out. This was a Jewish Israeli intelligence officer, Ari Ben Menashe, confirming that Israel's blackmailing President Trump. Again, ties so deeply to the Epstein list and everything that is going on at the moment, trying to get to the truth, and it's just been blocked time and time again. All right, so moving on. Now we see today we've got this 250 American legislators in Israel, and we see this 50 states, one Israel. So it's becoming so clear to people just how under the thumb they are. And the song being played was Project Monarch, and so much of this ties back to MK Ultra, getting people to do their dirty work with brain control, mind washing, programming, all these things that we see celebrities go through, as well as politicians. And none of this is coincidence, I don't think. We've also had this new bill introduced to Congress by Marco Rubio to revoke passports of any US citizens that criticize Israel. So all these free speech laws that are coming in, anti-Semitism laws, whether it's Australia, Canada, the US, seems to be this one state that you're not allowed to criticize and question at the time when so many people are waking up to what's really going on and who's pulling the strings. And as Sam Tripoli joked about here, anytime you question it, you're labelled as anti-Semitic. But if you do, you know your history, do your research, there's just hundreds of these assassinations, coincidences, time and time again. It seems to point to the same group of people. So this backdrop at the moment that we've got, where it looks like Israel are really trying to drag the US and start World War III with Iran, and Charlie Kirk was talking to Trump and saying, I don't agree with this, we shouldn't be doing this. they're now bombing Qatar as well. And what is it? 7, 8, 9 countries that they've now bombed with this Greater Israel plan that I've talked about, where they're always the victims. It's always self-defense. And these other countries like Qatar is a massive ally of the US. They've done everything the US has asked. The US has got some of their biggest strategic bases there, and now they're not even safe. And as always, Israel just say, oh, there was someone there from Hamas, so we're allowed to bomb it. Everything else is just collateral damage. Same story time and time again. Now, the other target that's becoming in the crosshairs is Venezuela. As always, there's many layers to this, but with the Middle East, there's always these strategic oil reserves, and not necessarily that the US need all that, but it's the fact that they don't want these countries to have that money and look after their citizens and not be under the thumb of the US, banking and hegemony system. And so this is very important to understand. And Maduro's been coming out and openly talking about the financial side of this with billions of dollars from the drug trafficking rings, and we've recently seen the US start to just strike boats or people that they deem as drug traffickers, terrorists, this type of thing, without a trial or anything. And this is all tying into this Palantir AI drone surveillance kill grid that they want to roll out for people. So Maduro hasn't been holding back. He's been talking about these, the satanic cult and these occult forces that are really behind all these leaders pulling the strings. People like Elon Musk that seem to be rolling out, the brain chips, the AI. It's all part of this one, I guess, movement that we're heading towards. And when people want to say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, we've literally got Peter Thiel starting tonight giving this 4-part lecture on the Antichrist. And so when you say all these people are part of this satanic occult, ties to this pedo stuff and the drug child trafficking networks, this all ties together, and there's just so much evidence. And I really hope people start to share these messages and videos and wake more people up. So this was a fantastic video about how Israel stole the nukes back in the 60s, and this organized web and this network which ties from the 60s all the way back to the same actors and people in these positions of power that need to be exposed, this Epstein network. So this was a fantastic watch. I can't recommend this enough. He really brung all the receipts. And let's hope that Israel don't use that Samsung option that they've spoke about, whereas if the world turns against them, they basically said they're just going to nuke everyone. This is how psychopathic these people really are. And with all this happening, you've got to think about the outcome. And this is a video David I put up last night talking about how this whole agenda is trying to turn everyone against each other. They've divided everyone. You just see how people have lost their minds and been divided into these little groups with these belief systems. And if you've got a different belief to someone, they want you to hate each other. And I want us to get to a place as humanity where we realize who the real villains are, the enemies within the deep state and these cults and whatnot. And that we've got to unite as humanity. It doesn't matter what political views you have, religious views, all these different issues now where people just have so much hate in them against the other people. They want us to destroy ourselves. Civil war is the goal. So keep that in mind. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and this breakdown. Share it with friends. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.